So far, we have learned about entropy, how to make logical arguments, and how to avoid logical fallacies. And we have also learned how the intricate organization of elements into life and the beginning of the universe from nothing point to God's existence. This week, we'll begin to look at an argument that builds on what we've learned about entropy and organization. And this argument will reveal a level of intention and planning in all of nature. This highly improbable nature of fine-tuning in the universe will lead us next to the argument from design. The word design means to plan and fashion something for a particular function, outcome, or purpose. Let's see an example of design in action. If we have an explosive form of energy, like gas, but we want to use that energy to drive a car, we have to use design. By controlling the intake, compression, explosion, and exhaust of gasoline and air, we can turn a shaft, and all of this takes very specific design. Then, gears are used to manage the power of the rotating shaft and transmit that power toward the wheels. And other gears transmit the rotation to the wheels and the car moves down the road. It takes design to engineer these various components and put them together to make the whole thing work. And just by looking at all of these parts, we can see that planning and thought went into the building of the final product. That is because design is always made evident by function, precision, and complexity. That is how we can easily recognize design when we see it. By function, I mean the special job, purpose, or duty that something is suited for, such as a gear that is best suited to interact with a similar gear, or an engine that's best suited for changing explosions into rotation. By precision, I mean mechanical, scientific, or mathematical exactness, such as the tolerances of two gears as they interface, or the mathematical fact that very small adjustments in one of the gears would cause it not to function with the other. And by complexity, I mean a high level of order and sophistication, and the opposite of simplicity or chaos. These attributes are some of the hallmarks of design, and we can look for them in various objects to determine if they are designed. Let's take a look at a mechanical watch that we already know is designed to see how the function, precision, and complexity of the watch prove a designer planned out and created each component. What a remarkable design! Let's ask some very important questions about this amazing pocket watch. The first question we can ask is, what if this was the size of a grandfather clock? Would it fit in a pocket then? No. So this particular timepiece was designed for a purpose, with very small and compact components to fit inside a small pocket-sized container. This shows us the purpose and intent that governed how the designer planned out this watch. Next, as we consider the various parts, we have to ask, can this watch function and count the passing hours, minutes, and seconds of time without all of these different components? The answer is no, and that fact is known as irreducible complexity. If we remove the knob that we use to wind the watch, for example, there would be no way to store up energy in the spring, and the watch would not function. If we remove the hour or minute hand from this design, then we cannot visually determine what the time was, so the whole design would be useless. The fact that all of these components have to be present in this design to make it do its job properly is what we mean by irreducible complexity, and we will learn about that feature more when we study biology. Now let's consider the mainspring. In a watch, the barrel spring or mainspring is made out of various engineered types of spring steel. Just a mild steel or another type of metal like brass or copper would not work properly, so a very specific type of alloy is used. What would happen if a non-spring steel was used in the barrel? The watch would not work. This means that the designer knew the requirements for the type of steel needed and made sure that the right kind of steel was used. Also, we see that the knob used to wind the spring has grooves cut into it, so that the user can wind the spring without slipping, because a smooth knob would not work as well. This also indicates design and planning. The mainspring is housed inside the barrel, which transfers the spring energy into the wheels of the watch. What if the barrel didn't have any teeth? Could it interact with the wheels? More than that, what if the barrel had the wrong number of teeth? This would cause the entire watch to keep time incorrectly. This leads us to a very important point. Time is very precise, and the number of gears on the wheels and their ratio to each other is what allows the watch to actually keep time. This means that the watch has to be mathematically designed to have just the right number of teeth to control each rotation and correctly count hours, minutes, and seconds. Mathematical fine-tuning has to be present for the gears in a watch to work correctly. Also, in order to keep things ticking along at just the right cadence, the escapement is used. But it will not perform its job alone either. It has to work with the rest of the parts in the watch, like the pallets. The pallets interact with the escapement to keep the watch ticking along methodically. And the pallets must be pivoting in relation to the forked lever. Then the forked lever must interact correctly with the impulse pin. These highly interactive and interdependent components function together to achieve a specific result and deal with the various challenges the designer faced. And there is also the balance wheel, which, as the name implies, it must be balanced, which took intelligence and intent. And the motion of the balance wheel is controlled by the balance spring, which again must be made out of just the right metals at just the right tension. Then all of these opposing and controlled forces propel a second hand that moves 60 times per minute. There's also a minute hand that precisely counts 60 movements per hour. And finally, an hour hand that counts out 24 hours in the day. We can see by all of the various levels of function, complexity, and precision that we have just touched on, the watch is exquisitely designed, and the designer is evident because of the clear and absolute statistical fact that these various components are fine-tuned to do just what they do in just the way that they do them. If one tooth goes missing, or if one spring breaks, or if anything is modified from this precise mechanism, then its overall function would break down. The remaining precision would become meaningless, and even though its complexity would still exist, it would become pointless complexity. So these observations can be applied to our universe as well. In much the same way as the number of teeth are mathematically necessary for a watch to keep proper time, our universe has some very interesting mathematical features called constants. These constants must be as they are for everything to exist as it does. Let's see a little video that demonstrates how these constants have affected science.
Regardless of whether or not they believe in God, most scientists agree the cosmic code appears to exist.
Everything in the universe is determined by the fundamental forces of nature. The strengths of those forces are characterized by numbers called fundamental constants that are so sensitive that if they changed by just a little bit, the universe as we know it wouldn't be here. For example, if the rate of expansion of the universe had changed by 1 part in a quintillion is 1 with 18 zeros after it, the universe would continue to expand or collapse back on itself, and none of this would be possible. To illustrate just how small a number 1 part in a quintillion is, imagine all the grains of sand on this beach. In fact, imagine all the grains of sand in all the world's beaches. That number's probably somewhere around a quintillion. In this analogy, if all that sand represented the rate of expansion of the universe, how many grains of sand would I need to add or subtract to wreck the universe? Just 1 grain, 1 in a quintillion. That's how precise things had to be for us to be here.
I don't know a single scientist who would disagree with the statement that the world is exceedingly ingenious. Not just mathematical, not just beautiful, not just elegant, but the manifestation of something truly extraordinary.
We can imagine, as it were, turning the knobs, which were set up at the time of the Big Bang to determine how it expanded and what it was made of. And if we turn the knobs very slightly, we find that we would end up with a universe that would not be so propitious for the emergence of life.
Take gravity, perhaps the most familiar of the laws of nature. Its value determines how much things are attracted to each other. From us being stuck to the Earth circling our sun, to the stars held in place in remote galaxies billions of light years away. Just the tiniest adjustment to the value of gravity in a computer simulation of the Big Bang, and our universe doesn't emerge at all.
For example, if gravity were very strong, then anything as big as us would get crushed. If there were no gravity at all, then no stars would be able to form because they're held together by gravity. No planets either.
And the other laws are equally fine-tuned. Any slight adjustment to their value, and we would never exist. There is no known reason why these values should be set as they are, yet they do seem to be fine-tuned to allow our creation. For a while, mainstream cosmologists were content that once we understood better the underlying reason for the laws being set as they are, fine-tuning would no longer seem so mystical, and would once again fall within the realms of physics and mathematics.
The general view of this, for most physicists, is that these fine-tunings are largely accidental, that the constants of nature are determined by some mathematical principles which have nothing whatever to do with our existence. Impersonal, mathematical, and we were just incredibly lucky that that mathematics happened to give rise to a universe with all this kind of fine-tuning, just precisely so.
And so the anthropic principle existed as an interesting but eccentric theory. But then, quite unexpectedly, a completely new law of nature was discovered, and our universe relied on this law being so precisely tuned that it seemed no rational theory would ever explain it.
Our universe seems to be defined by a set of numbers which in some sense look special. If we had different numbers, we would end up with a sterile universe. People react to this seeming coincidence in a number of ways. You could say it's the outcome of some kind of design or providence. We could say it's a brute fact we have to accept, because these numbers might be determined by some theory which we haven't yet discovered.
For a while it was possible to believe that the laws of nature were not so precisely set as to require the hand of a creator. But then a completely new fundamental property of the universe was discovered. An anti-gravity force present in space itself. It is called the cosmological constant, and when cosmologists calculated its effect on the evolution of the universe, they realized it had to be very finely tuned indeed.
The fine-tunings, how fine-tuned are they? Most of them are 1% sort of things. In other words, if a thing is 1% different, everything gets bad. And a physicist could say, maybe those are just luck. On the other hand, this cosmological constant is tuned to 1 part and 10 to the 120, 120 decimal places. Nobody thinks that's accidental. That is not a reasonable idea, that something is tuned to 120 decimal places just by accident. That's the most extreme example of fine-tuning.
No force in the history of cosmology has ever been discovered to be that finely tuned. The cosmological constant needs to be set to 1 part in a trillion, 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 trillion. That the cosmological constant arrived at such a tiny value by chance seemed to be out of the question, but the alternative explanation was also impossible to contemplate.
Physicists did not want to accept the idea that the laws of nature might be controlled by well, the benevolence of nature. There should be no reason why the luck should just have it that we can exist. It's too much, it's a stretch. It's much too far to stretch.
It seemed that hidden in the laws of nature was a value so precise that it was impossible to deny that our universe was designed. But a designed universe requires the existence of a designer. The scientists were between a rock and a hard place. Their own discoveries were pointing them towards an intelligent designer.
This is its dislike of mixing religion into physics. I think they were somewhat afraid that if it was admitted that the reason the world is the way it is has to do with our own existence, that could be hijacked by the creationists, by the intelligent designers. And of course, what they would say is, yes, we always told you so. There is a benevolent somebody way up high in the universe who created the universe exactly so that we could live. I think physicists shrank at the idea of getting involved in such things.
So these and other fundamental facts about our universe show that life exists on a very thin, very precise line of probability that's far beyond chance. These numbers, called constants, are so precise and so specific that any little change in them would make all life impossible. Life is the function, the precision is beyond exacting, and the complexity is breathtaking. These constants and their very specific and fine-tuned nature have led many non-religious scientists to say some very amazing things. Fred Hoyle, a British astrophysicist, said, "A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as with chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seems to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question." Paul Davies said, "There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming." Paul Davies also said, "The laws of physics seem to be the product of exceedingly ingenious design. The universe must have a purpose." John O'Keefe, who is an astronomer at NASA, said, "If the universe had not been made with the most exacting precision, we could have never come into existence. It is my view that these circumstances indicate the universe was created for man to live in." George Greenstein, an astronomer, said, "As we survey all the evidence, the thought insistently arises that some supernatural agency, or rather capital A agency, must be involved. Is it possible that suddenly, without intending to, we have stumbled upon scientific proof of the existence of a supreme being? Was it God who stepped in and so providentially crafted the cosmos for our benefit?" Arthur Eddington, an astrophysicist, said, "The idea of a universal mind or logos would be, I think, a fairly plausible inference from the present state of scientific theory." Arno Penzias, a winner of the Nobel Prize in Physics, said, "Astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the conditions required to permit life, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan." Vera Kistakauchi, an MIT physicist, said, "The exquisite order displayed by our scientific understanding of the physical world calls for the divine." Frank Tipler, a professor of mathematical physics, said, "When I began my career as a cosmologist some 20 years ago, I was a convinced atheist. I never in my wildest dreams imagined that one day I would be writing a book purporting to show that the central claims of Judeo-Christian theology are, in fact, true. That these claims are straightforward deductions of the laws of physics as we now understand them. I have been forced into these conclusions by the inexorable logic of my own special branch of physics." Now Tipler has actually converted to Christianity and wrote a book called The Physics of Christianity. Ed Harrison, a cosmologist, said, "Here is the cosmological proof of the existence of God. The design argument from Paley, updated and refurbished. The fine-tuning of the universe provides prima facie evidence of deistic design. Take your choice, blind chance that requires multitudes of universe, or design that requires only one." Many scientists, when they admit their views, incline toward the teleological or design argument. Barry Parker, a cosmologist, said, "Who created these laws? There is no question but that a God will always be needed. Arthur L. Schawlow, a professor of physics at Stanford University and a Nobel Prize winner in physics, said, "It seems to me that when confronted with the marvels of life and the universe, one must ask why and not just how. The only possible answers are religious. I find a need for God in the universe and in my own life." Werner Braun Brown said, "I find it as difficult to understand a scientist who does not acknowledge the presence of a superior rationality behind the existence of the universe as it is to comprehend a theologian who would deny the advances of science. These properties of our universe, called constants, have plainly revealed that our universe is intricately designed, and there is an undeniable function, indescribable precision, and incalculable complexity behind it all. These hallmarks of design lead us to the design argument. The design argument goes like this. As function, precision, and complexity increase, the probability of intelligent design increases. And the universe has the highest level of function, precision, and complexity that we have ever witnessed. Therefore, the universe has the highest probability of intelligent design ever witnessed to this point. This probability obviously leads us to an intelligent designer of our universe. In other words, if the watch has a very, very low probability of ever being the result of blind chance and natural processes, how could the universe, which is orders of magnitude more finely tuned, functional, precise, and complex than a watch, ever possibly be the result of blind chance? Those who miss this obvious inference make chance and skepticism their God, instead of the obvious, intelligent designer that's evident in the things that he has made. And in regards to these many specific forces that hold things together as we see them in our universe, God reveals He is the one holding all things together by the word of His power. And the Lord, by wisdom, founded the earth, and by understanding, He established the heavens. We can see traces of God's unfathomable wisdom and infinite understanding in our vast universe, and His amazing design is revealed even in the mathematical and universal constants that make life possible for us all.